Woman who was dead appeared at the funeral itself. Something bad happened. What would you do if, in the middle of a funeral, the person who was supposed to be inside the coffin appeared right in front of you in the flesh? It looks like a scene from a horror movie, doesn't it? But there's nothing fictional here, it's a real story. Are you super curious? So leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and let's go to the video. The year was 2015, and a big funeral was organized by Noela Rukundo. After all, she was greatly missed in the hearts of her family and friends. However, this was no ordinary funeral, as we usually see around here. In fact, not even Michael Jackson's funeral held as many mysteries as what happened that day in Noela Rukundo's funeral. But what was this bizarre mystery? The information that was passed on to family members about the woman was still inconclusive. No one had quite understood why she'd lost her life. All they knew was that the mother of 8 children had died in a tragic car accident. The accident had been so serious, it wasn't even possible to bury her body due to the impact. Everything was very strange, but still the funeral went on. At the ceremony, among the relatives was Balenga Kalala, married to Noela and now a widower. At least that's what it looked like. What does that mean? It turns out that to everyone's surprise, Noela suddenly appeared through the front door of the place where the funeral was taking place. This, of course, made the event end at that moment, and everyone was terrified. The only one who wasn't crying was Balenga, her husband. For him, that apparition was not good at all. In fact, it was as if he was seeing a ghost right in front of him. But there was nothing supernatural about what Balenga was witnessing at that moment. Unfortunately for him, Noela was actually alive. But why was that bad for him? Shouldn't Balenga be happy that his wife was alive? This is much more than a drama story, it's a revenge tale. Noela Rukundo was one of the main characters in our story of the young lady. She lived with her husband Kalala and their children in Melbourne, Australia. Balenga and Noela had met 11 years before. The marriage seemed to be going well, but that wasn't the case. Unfortunately, one day she received news that her stepmother had lost her life. Therefore, the woman had to travel about 12,000 kilometers to the funeral of her relative, whom she loved so much, to her hometown in Burundi, Africa. Since this was a last-minute trip, Noela had to leave all 8 children with her husband, but that wasn't cause for concern. That's what the woman thought after all, he was their father. However, she was wrong, and that the woman would soon find out. The funeral of Noela's stepmother was very sad. After the ceremony, she returned to her hotel in Bujumbura, the capital of Burundi, to rest a little. It was around this time that her husband called Noela directly from Australia. After they exchanged a few words, he advised her to go outside for some air as it would make her feel better. Well, why not, thought Noela. So, following her husband's advice, little did Noela know that this would be one of her biggest mistakes. The woman went downstairs thinking she would have a moment of calm. However, as soon as she left the hotel, a man pointed a gun at her and told her not to scream or he'd shoot. Feeling very scared, she followed all the instructions and soon found herself blindfolded inside a car. Half an hour later, there she was, strapped to a chair in an abandoned building. Totally lost, the woman had no idea where she was and was already beginning to accept the idea that she'd never see her children again. These moments of terror did not pass so quickly. After 2 days of kidnapping, one of the men asked her what she had done to make her husband want to take her life. Upon hearing these words, Noela was stunned and her world collapsed. This could only be a mistake. They must be lying. It's not possible for her husband to do something like that. The bandits even asked if the woman had cheated on her husband. She said no, and that, by the way, she had a beautiful family with him and together they raised 8 children. The kidnappers were all then confused. To solve the case, one of them picked up the phone and made a call. Noela Rukundo froze immediately when she recognized her husband's voice on the other end of the line. When the kidnapper asked again, Kalala Balenga said clearly, "Eliminate her." Despite knowing that her husband was mean to some people, she would never have imagined that he would try to end her life. After all, they had been together for 11 years. What would happen to their children? How would her family face the idea that she would probably never return to Australia? She was desperate and confused. But that's when the woman was surprised. The bandit said that they'd never intended to obey that order. In fact, by coincidence, those 2 men knew Noela's brother. Besides, after all, it wasn't like them to do bad things to women or children. The hired thieves' objective was to spare the woman and on top of that, extort all of Kalala's money. The men then released Noela and told her to return to her house and tell the other woman and her family that they should leave their aggressive husbands. Shocked, however full of certainties, she wasted no time and began to plan revenge. Before releasing her, the bandits handed her a memory card with all the evidence against her husband. In addition, she contacted the Kenyan and Belgian embassies to get her back to Australia, and she called the pastor of her church in Melbourne. Together, they found a way to repatriate Noela without raising the suspicion of her husband and all other family members. When she arrived home in Australia, she realized one thing. Her husband had already broken the news to everyone. Noela entered her house and waited for some family members to leave the farewell ceremony. On the day of the funeral, the entire community came to comfort Kalala in his grief. After a few minutes, when the movement of people had slowed down a lot, the hateful husband had the biggest shock of his life. Suddenly, she showed up at her own funeral. No one could even believe it. Something was wrong. It was a huge happiness for the family members who were still there, but a tragedy for Kalala. Right there in front of him, his wife's ghost stared at him. Looking at the man, Noela spoke in a mocking tone, "Surprise, I'm still alive." When Balenga put his hands on her shoulders and realized that she was really alive, he burst into tears. The woman realized that she was face to face with the faker who lived next to her for over a decade. She felt as if she had been reborn. By that time, Noela had called the police, and her villainous husband was surrounded. Having at first denied the facts, Kalala confessed. He tried to take her life because he was afraid of her leaving him for another man. Kalala was sentenced to 9 years in prison. In addition, he was forbidden to approach his ex-wife. But for Noela, the story didn't end there. Many people in the African community living in Melbourne blamed her for denouncing Kalala. This was followed by many anonymous threats and an attempted break-in at her home. Nowadays, after all the movie-worthy history that took place in 2015, and we can follow in detail, Noela is no longer the same person. She says she can still hear her husband's voice ordering her to be eliminated. But she's not afraid and says, "I will rise up as a strong woman. My past life is gone, I'm starting a new life now." She even became an example to be followed by all women who suffer from some form of violence from their partners. Also, watch the story of a man who believed that his wife had been kidnapped and died 3 years ago, but sometime later he was using his Instagram and discovered something unbelievable. Are you super curious? Just click on the video that's appearing on your screen and I'll see you there.